Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I have for the third time on the show, Toby Cowern. Toby, how are you doing?
I'm good. Third time's lucky. So let's see where we're going to
Yes,
go today.
I think you're the first guest who's come back for a third time, which is good for me because I'm happy that somebody at least wants to do that. That means that the podcast is not that terrible. But also for the previous episodes, and there's going to be links to what Toby and I are talking about, and I'll put those in the show notes. You can go to wimsblog.com for the podcast episode, and you'll find that. But we talked two times in the past, and I was mainly at pretty much the beginning of the pandemic, and then I think it was about a year after, maybe a little bit longer, looking back up at what happened and how we viewed things. The reason I asked Toby to come on again is for those listening. The one of the previous episodes I interviewed Andy Benfield, who has spent a lot of time traveling to all over the world, many third world countries, including the Himalayas and lots of very, very cold places. And he's going back there right now again to film something. And talking about surviving in cold weather, surviving in austere environments in which society not necessarily fully breaks down, but you don't have the luxury and the comfort of the Western lifestyle most of us are accustomed to. Now, Toby is an expert in these topics as well. I'm going to briefly, introduce you. So, military background, which I don't know how much you want to talk about that. Survival experts, both urban survival, but in particular, surviving in cold climates, because you live in what I like to call the fierce northern wastelands of Scandinavia, and it gets really, really cold up there. And you teach people this, you teach classes, courses, and so on. Toby has an excellent Patreon together with Selco, who's one of the almost mythical people in the preparedness sphere. So I very much recommend everybody check that out as well, because there's a ton of information right there. And Toby's been kind enough to once again join me on the podcast to talk about what we have coming next. We're both living in Europe. I suspect that in other parts of the world, it might be for some people similar. For some people, they're not there yet. Hopefully they don't get there, but we'll see. But long story short, we have war in Europe, and we will talk about the war in the bonus episode, because we want to stick to, as much as possible, practical advice to prepare for winter in Europe. So we've got war, but we also have an energy crisis. As one of my students who knows told me a while ago, he said, if it weren't for COVID, we would have been talking about the energy crisis a few years ago. So the energy crisis means that, for instance, here where I live, our monthly cost for electricity has doubled already. Gas is going to do the same thing. So if you want to have electricity and heat your house over here, it's becoming very, very expensive. For some people, it's their entire paycheck. We have already had deaths here in Belgium because a woman and her daughter, they didn't want to heat their place with the electricity or gas, I don't remember what it was, but they used a barbecue inside to heat up everything. And obviously CO poisoning happened and they passed away. So there is one example. There's going to be more because people often have not enough experience in these kind of situations. And I wanted to ask Toby some advice for anybody of you listening in Europe. We don't know how bad it will get, but it looks like that just heating your house, having electricity will be very expensive. And for some people, too expensive. What could we do? So that's a little bit of the background. I'm going to hand it over to you, Toby. So wherever you want to take this.
All right, thanks, Wim. Thanks for the introduction. I just want to expand a little bit on the resume, if I can.
Yeah.
The urban survival is basically, I've been working for over a decade with Selco now, who survived through the Balkans conflict and benefited from that brutal experience, and has been incredibly generous, sharing his knowledge for years now. And it's almost, I would say, prophetic what he's been talking about and what's come to pass and where things are going. So first of all, props to him for the share, and he's there on the Patreon with me. And then tied into that, I've been working with the applied wilderness survival for over 30 years now, and 15 years full-time teaching up here in the far north of Sweden inside the Arctic Circle. So just to give your listeners some reassurance, this isn't book knowledge we're talking about. This has all come from exceptionally applied, self-referencing, going out, doing it, living it. This building you see is my backdrop. We overnighted in that when I was down in the Balkans a couple of years ago, pre-COVID. You know, these are the conditions we expose ourselves to make sure everything we're sharing comes from an authentic, actionable, well-meaning place with integrity. All right. So why is that important? Because some of what I'm going to say is probably very counterintuitive or against the narrative. And that's because there's a lot of people in the preppersphere and the survival community that are just regurgitating book knowledge and are dealing with what I call accepted truths, that if it's been published in more than 3 different places, then it must be right. But what they're not understanding is the plagiarism in both urban and wilderness survival is absolutely monumental. So people just basically copy paste things and brand the article as theirs, and away they go. So things that are factually flawed completely enter the mainstream narrative as this is a legitimate thing. Okay, exactly the same in the self-defense and martial arts community. we know it, and of course, you know, modern media has made it even worse, that the sort of plagiarism just magnifies the fact. So it's not even having 3 primary sources of reference. It's like, oh, everywhere I look, I get this thing, and so that must be a thing. And it's just not come from any live experience type thing. So I just wanted to kind of frame that. So if you find yourself pulling back a little bit as I'm talking, just maybe give me the benefit of the doubt if it's running counter to your narrative. And I'm sure the same with you, Wim, on some of the things you're going to say. Right, to get this started, we're not entering a normal crisis. Going into this would be bad in any context, in any terms, especially, as you're saying, the primary thing we're looking at is the energy crisis, which then has a downstream effect on every single other thing: supply chain, cost of living, etc., etc. The key thing to understand is everybody's already exhausted. We're not going into this fresh. This isn't the first round of the fight. We're probably 6 rounds in. The mental and vis-a-vis physical fatigue from the pandemic is evident. Everybody I am talking to, without exception, high caliber, professional, amazing people, are tired. If not tired, exhausted. So that fatigue level that we're already in compounds everything. So you made a nice point there, like, you know, maybe you'll get away with it. Maybe you're not going to get that affected. Maybe you've got the money to just buy your way through this and it's no problem. That doesn't mean anyone else wants to hear about how easy a time you're having. All right. Yeah. Normally that wouldn't be the case. But in this, you know, people are bristling. They're already pissed. They're already looking for a fight. They're already resenting a lot of things that have happened. And now this thing gets added on top of it. And that makes for a much more explosive, dangerous start point, because this isn't about warm water coming up to the boil. This is water that's already at a simmer and looking to heat up more. So, you know, how quickly can we get to mass protests, riots, violent disorder? Really quickly, because we're already pretty much there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the thing I would add to that is that if, for instance, we just, before we started recording, we talked about that. Here in Europe, in many countries, the biggest media outlet is the state media outlet. For Belgium, that's VRT or RTBF. So these are the 2 main news sources. They are directly controlled by the government. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I think the equivalent in the US would be NPR, which is like, you know, very much, you know, state-owned, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, these media outlets have a vested interest in not, you know, kicking against the shins of the government all that much, because they are, the board of directors is politically appointed. I mean, that's just how the system works here. If all you watch is mainstream media in Europe, you, in my opinion, do not have the full picture. You have a part of the picture. We had a good example of that during the pandemic. in that there was a certain narrative that was created, and afterwards turned out that many of these things were wrong, or they didn't know, or et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to go too much into that, but this should be an example that is freshest in mind for most people. Now, why is this important? When you look a little bit outside of mainstream media sources, you will find that there, for the last few months and even longer, there have been massive riots and protests throughout Europe, in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, the farmers' protests in the Netherlands, and so on. I'm not quite sure if the average European citizen is quite up to speed about how many of these protests and so on are happening. So if you keep that in mind, that maybe if you haven't specifically been looking for this information, you might think, well, no, Toby's exaggerating. There's not that. We're very far off that point in time when there's massive civil unrest. I would suggest digging a little bit deeper, looking outside of state media and so on. Not going to conspiracy websites. You don't have to do that. But if you start looking, you will find that information where you see that actually things have gotten very, very tense already. Go ahead.
Thanks, Wim. And so the key takeaway from that there is, I'm not going to say the mainstream media is our enemy.
No.
But they're certainly not your friend. Yeah. Okay. I just I'm going to just lay that down as a caveat. All media is questionable. Yeah. You've got to go into it with a healthy dose of cynicism. But you're exactly right there. With the state-owned media, they are performing a state function. It's as simple as that. Yeah. And that might be a necessary function for society to continue, that people believe there isn't this tension, there isn't this unrest, and they don't want to see it promoted, but that doesn't mean it's not there. So that just really goes back to reinforce my point. We're not starting in a fresh fight now. We're already going in, slugging it out, punch drunk, and people are sort of deciding who they're cheering for. Tied in with that, for those that are starting to see a difference between what the mainstream media says and what's going on the ground, it just reinforces that distrust, because now we're being told things that we're effectively being told what you are seeing with your own eyes and what you're hearing with your own ears isn't happening. And that's not healthy. Nobody wants to be in that kind of relationship when it's like your own lived experience is being questioned by some anonymous source. And so what you're finding now is that at a very individual level just adds to the tension. And then as soon as you've got a collective to gather around, it can get explosive. And you've named some great things there about the farmers' protests, particularly there in the Netherlands and surrounding areas. There's protests around no nice way to say it, criminal rape gangs that have acted with impunity in the UK for 4 decades and more. There's some real major hot topic issues around immigration, around manufacture, around climate, around economy, that have got people agitated, and they're really, really starting to show. And that just adds to this overall issue of what would be normal interactions on the street or problem-free interactions on the street are now becoming increasingly tense. And I'll give one example that you would have seen in the state media, is that of like the protesters, defacing works of art, gluing themselves to roads and things like that. And you see how that's presented as these are the good guys doing the right thing. But if you just look at the footage, if you turn the sound down and you look at the footage, look at those drivers interactions with the protesters, look at those drivers interactions with the police, understand we are very, very not far away from somebody just starting to drive over people. Yeah. All right. And they'll be vilified and they'll be condemned and they'll be everything, but they're just seeing that now as a very legitimate solution. And again, people are dying. We had a first death in the UK of somebody that the ambulance got the patient, but couldn't get to hospital because eco protesters were blocking the streets, which everybody assessed was going to happen. It was inevitable. That's now happened. And people are calling for accountability. And accountability on top of a lack of accountability that's been going on for years now. And this isn't even talking about the pandemic. We said pre-record, we're decades into some of these issues in terms of poor or undesirable government. So we need to get to the good stuff, right? We don't want to rant. We said that, but I just want to frame this up a little bit, that simmering tension is very much just sub-boiling point now. It's not tepid, lukewarm water that we're swimming in currently. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that, then the energy crisis, what to do about that? It's going to vary very individually. And that's why it's going to be hard to get into any specific recommendations, because it's going to be so subjective. Like for me, getting a wood burning stove is a great idea. It's a brilliant alternative, but I'm in a house with a chimney that I can install a wood burning stove into, and it's relatively easy to source wood because that's still a major fuel source in the region that I live.
Yeah.
And so that's relatively affordable, actionable, desirable, doable. But for somebody living in an apartment in the middle of a major city, that's just not something they can do. So I'm going to be a little bit careful about the sort of over specificity. Everybody should have a wood burning stove. It's more, if this is an option for you, great. But we're just looking at now, first of all, take stock of your current energy systems and use. And first of all, look at how can you minimize or make more efficient your use of those energy in that heating. Okay. And this is going to be a key theme that we're going to hit today. This is about very much managing your own expectations. There is a big difference between being uncomfortable and being in a survival situation. Okay. In a survival situation, you will be uncomfortable. That much is given, but you've got this very realistic threat of harm hanging over you. Sometimes it's a case of, okay, now I can't wander around my apartment naked at 22 degrees. I'm going to turn it down to 16 degrees and maybe I have to wear clothes. That is not a survival situation you're now in. You're still in a 16 degrees Celsius apartment, just wearing more clothes than you're used to. So there's going to be a lot of reframing on this, of people believing they're in imminent peril and they're actually just ever so slightly uncomfortable. And that's going to be the new normal emerging, is you're just going to embrace initially, and in time and conditioning, if you allow it, thrive in that discomfort. And this is one of the things we always aim for. It's one of the sort of big headers on the board we put when we enter into survival training or anything sort of arduous in the outdoors, is you want to hit that point that you're comfortable being uncomfortable. And that is that superpower territory, because now you are able to operate well, thoroughly, efficiently, effectively, and just not worry about the discomfort because you understand that's all it is. Okay. Same in a training session, right? Same when you're sparring. First time somebody gets bopped, oh my God, it's like I'm going to get an MRI. I've got brain damage. I'm going to die. Few sessions in, they start to eat punches, too many, and then they start to learn that sucks, and I'm going to start to move my head more and listen to what my teacher's saying. But there comes a time when people come to class, they don't want to do technique. They want to spar, right? They've moved through that curve, and it's now they want to embrace that challenge and start to up the ante and up the tempo and up the weight and everything that goes from there. So we as a species actually thrive in the adaptation. We do. And it's only recently have we wallowed in this demanding a comfort zone to be occupied in. And that's not the natural part of the history of humanity. And it's going to be the short-lived bit, I hope, because the current reality sucks about people demanding the world conform to their view and their comfort zone, and anything outside of that is intolerable. We need to move past that part and get back to the thriving in adaptation and adversity. All right. That was a lot of talking, so I'm going to kick it back to you, Wim.
No, it makes perfect sense. Again, we agreed before we started recording that we are going to avoid ranting too much. So I'm not going to rant. I'm going to give a frame to the lens to view this through as well. So I have talked for years about what I saw, the dangers of postmodernism, what's called wokeness now, and so on. What it boils down to is that for about almost 15 years now, this in Western societies, also in others, but mostly in Western societies, Europe and the US and Canada, you have seen this emphasis on grievances and whether past, present, whether real or imagined, and this almost idolizing of victimhood, and everybody's a victim and isn't that. I'm not going to go into that too much. The main point I want to make is that this has become the standard. Like I cannot open a newspaper where I live where there's not one or multiple articles about that. Like somebody is being discriminated against, somebody is this and that, and so on. It's always about victimhood. Now, what I've said a while ago already is that as we enter the economic recession, which it looks like it's going to be a depression actually, um, all that kind of stuff will become less important to most people because they will be too focused on survival, getting food for their children, and so on. We always say that nowadays Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a little bit antiquated, but it's a good model, I think, to explain certain things. And when you fall down to just the basics, like, do I have a roof over my head? Am I not at the mercy of the elements? Like when winter comes and it's freezing and you don't have any heating, you're going to have to survive. Is there enough food? Is it too expensive? Can I buy it? And so on. Will I be able to buy it next week? If those kind of things become your daily reality, all these higher level things, like, I'm being victimized, I'm discriminated against, most people will not have time for that, no energy to spare, and it will not be a priority for them. Now, as so many people, in particular young people, by that I mean teenagers, 20-somethings, and even 30-somethings, because you and I, Toby, are getting older. That has been their experience for the past 15 maybe years or longer, is that they are in for a very, very rough awakening when, hopefully not too bad, but when it happens, when assume, prepare for the worst and hope for the best, that they are going to have to have a fundamental paradigm shift. And that is what you're talking about. Okay, we have to thrive through adversity, not just survive, but you have to actually make it work for you. This is a difficult message to take if you're, I have two kids, they're in their early 20s, and I've been talking, obviously they're my children, so they had a different upbringing than most with this stuff. But I told them like a long time ago, don't spend your money on stupid stuff, start saving. If you need to buy something, buy it now before it's too expensive. And we're in for a rough couple of years, but you will get through this, you will survive this, but you're going to have to change a little bit how you view life. It's not going to be the same. How bad will it get? Maybe it's just very annoying and uncomfortable, like you just said. Maybe it's horrible, and anything in between is possible. We don't know. But if you've lived in that mindset of just the highest level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you think that's the only thing that ever happens, it's going to be rough for you. And rough, I mean, it can happen as of next week. If next week in Europe temperatures drop significantly, that's when the party will start. So the main thing I would say to people who are listening to this, and if this is new information for them, you don't have to panic. It's all about preparing. Human beings have survived on this planet for millennia through much harsher climates and with much less technology than we have now. So we've never been in a better position to survive this and to thrive and to move on to whenever this goes away. So it's more a message of hope as opposed to despair and panic. So there you go. For once, I'm not the voice of doom and gloom.
And I'm pleased we framed that way, Wim, because it's really, really important. That's where we're at. There's no point doom and gloom. Is it going to be tough? Yes. But let's put it like this. We need to take ownership of these issues now. The economic crisis from 2007, 2008 got kicked down the road. And I, for one, am sort of personally glad of that, because it gave me 10 more years to get ready. and I learned a lot from 2005 to 2008, which I've been able to action and subsequently. But this is we're at that point. It needs to stop here. If this gets kicked any further down the road, it's passing it down to a generation that doesn't deserve to inherit it. It's our problem, and we need to take ownership. But that ownership is going to be brutal.
Can I quickly say something about that?
Yeah, of course.
So again, we talked about mainstream media and so on. A lot of people still have no idea how bad it is and how bad it's going to get. I mean, Belgium is at, I think, about 12% inflation, but compared to Turkey, which is like 75 or 80 by now. So I would suggest, and I'll put links in the show notes. There's it's called FinTwit, financial Twitter. There's a lot of people who are really good financial analysts and investors and so on, who have been giving a lot of information about this. You don't see them in the mainstream media, but you do see them in big podcasts and so on. There's a few people I would like you to follow. There's Lynn Alden, who's an investor who I like very much. There's a group called Doomberg, which I love as a name. It's a collective of analysts and so on. And they are putting out quality information with graphs, with statistics and so on, showing just how bad things are and what is this tsunami of consequences of the whole financial system and the world economy that is just barreling downhill at us. And I'm mixing metaphors, but for a lot of people, this is news. They think, yeah, but it's bad. But go back about a year ago, when there were still, maybe a little bit longer than a year, when you would hear in the news, well, no, there's no real inflation. And a few months later, well, okay, there's some inflation, but it's not bad. And then it was, okay, it's getting a little bit higher, but it's transitionary. Okay, but it's pretty high, and it's here to stay. But actually, that's not a bad thing. So if you go back a year and a half, you will see these news articles come up. And now it's like, wow, inflation is through the roof. And what's her name? Lagarde, Christian Lagarde, who said that, inflation came out of nowhere. She just said that. We're like, no, it didn't. So anyway, if you're thinking like, the economy is not that bad, and we've had a recession before, it's going to be fine. Okay, follow these people for a little while, and whether you like them or not, it doesn't matter. But that's what I mean with looking outside of mainstream news at people who are actually, if you have some idea of the financial world, you'll see that they know what they're talking about, and they're not too hyperbolic. And especially Bloomberg has a Substack that is really good, and they have very clear logic behind what they say, and they give good quotes and so on. Same thing with Lynn Alden, which is like, hey, look at this graph. This is what I think this means. For instance, I recently saw a graph of American credit card spending. It is through the roof right now. I mean, the graph, it doesn't go vertical, but it's I would say it's exponential at this point. People are basically paying rent with their credit card, things, and buying groceries with their credit card, because that's how bad it's getting. Okay, multiply that with a few more months of this. Eventually you run out of credit. What happens then? So anyway, that's what I wanted to add to that.
And this is, so to timestamp this is like, end of October 2022. For anybody listening back and realize and trying to figure out what went wrong. This is where we're at right now. And it's still actionable, because what we're in now is things are getting more expensive by every week, if not every day. And what I'm doing every couple of weeks is actually just going down to the city and just going to supermarkets and doing price checks myself. It's like I'm absorbing the information from the external, but just with my own eyes and own ears. What's fuel costing? What's a tin of beans costing? What's a tin of tuna costing? What's a coffee costing? And just keeping track of that. Officially, 10.1% is inflation in Sweden. I can do the numbers myself, and it's not 10.1%. My money's not going, my purchasing power is not decreased by 10%. It's decreased by 40%, if not more, depending on what it is I'm actually purchasing. So you don't even have to trust anybody at this stage other than yourself by just going and looking at the prices and doing some comparison. Why is this important now? There comes a transition point that unaffordable becomes unavailable. Okay. And so this is about, you either just don't have the money, as in you just don't have any resources left, or what you want to buy is no longer available. And that can be out of economic desire, like that manufacturer is now not putting that product in your market because they can't sell it there, so they're selling it elsewhere, Russian gas, amongst other things, or the supply chain is just interrupted. It's just not being made anymore. And I'll just give you one example of this from a conversation I had at the weekend, just to kind of illustrate the point from my own eyes and ears. I want to focus on that a little bit today, as well as the expertise that we can tap into that's not necessarily in the mainstream. Talking to a friend of mine who runs a big event company. So, thousands of people turn up, buy tickets to come and, go to this kind of open air festival or market or whatever the case may be. And it just restarted this summer after the pandemic. They'd managed to survive through that. And I was asking him how business is going. He says it's really, really struggling, because a lot of the open air events they did were vehicle based. So it's not only forest machines that are very popular, it's kind of car manufacturers and this, that, and the other, looking to attract people in and have like a big sales event. And he said none of the car manufacturers are booking, because they've all got back orders of up to 2 years.
Yeah.
All their inventory sold out. everything. They've got nothing to sell, so they're not coming to the marketplace because they don't need to sell anything, because the supply chains are so short. And the panic's already happened in that market, that as people are told you can order now, but it's going to take 3 months, 6 months, 9 months to wait. That already did the rounds, and people are like, oh, I better order right now, fear of missing out. And their order books are filled. And now they've got orders coming in that they are telling the customer, we do not know when that order will be fulfilled. But they're saying, I'll order it anyway, because whenever I get it in the future is acceptable to me. Now, whether those orders get retracted or not, we don't know. But this is how much of a mess is there right now. And that's that sort of exponential effect. It's not about just the car market. There's a whole other secondary economy of these trading shows are now desperately seeking customers that want to sell, but are struggling to do that because either don't have money or they don't have inventory. Right. So we're getting this knock-on effect. That said, some stuff is still available. So we should be capitalizing on that now and really doing our sums and figuring out what are we prioritizing. So is it about buying the iPhone 9000 for Christmas, or is it about that wood stove? Or that small propane heater, or the alternative heating supply that we referenced a little bit earlier on. Okay, I know Christmas normally for the kids goes like this. This year's probably going to be different. All right, it's not even probably, it's definitely going to be different. And the longer you sort of ignore that and try to just act like it's just a passing thing, the more it's going to hurt, and the more you're just going to be late to the show. When it actually comes down to it, and you go, you know what, it's been 2-3 months since I listened to Toby and Wim. I agree with what they're saying. I'm going to go buy that thing now. It's not going to be there. It's just not going to be available. And then you're going to be getting into black market territory. Okay. So there'll always be a supply chain, but now you're either paying ridiculously inflated prices, 3,000% plus, for something that may or may not work, because now you're not buying it from a regular store with a 30-day guarantee. All right, you're gonna turn up in some dodgy area to get the thing passed over and hope it works, and find out when you get home it does, it doesn't, whatever the case may be, with absolutely no comeback. All right, so what we're trying to do is spare you that additional pain that's still avoidable now.
Yeah, a few quick things. So again, speaking from personal experience, we switched to making our own bread earlier in the beginning of the year. I bought this machine that you just put the ingredients in, and a few hours later you've got excellent bread. You can buy the ingredients here. We've got a miller that is very close to us that we can buy whatever we want and so on for as long as that lasts. But anyway, why? Because I figured that with the war in Ukraine breaking out, bread would be more expensive because wheat for Europe comes from there. And even if it's not right now, in the end, it's going to happen that it's going to be more expensive. Last week, I saw the first bread here in Belgium in a bakery that cost €5. Now, that was a special one with special ingredients, like the specialty breads they like to sell here. I think the average price at a bakery now is around 2.5, €3, maybe even more right now. 6 out of 10 of all bakers in Antwerp are about to close down because of the energy cost. I have that machine that I bought to make my bread now costs €100 more from when I bought it less than a year ago. And it's only going to go up. And a lot of them aren't available anymore. They're not in stock. You got crappy ones. They'll work. And you could do it, over a wood fire or in a basic oven as well, if you like. You can bake bread that way, but you might not be able to do that, like you said, in an apartment. One of my clients does construction, huge office buildings and so on. Told me one of the big projects they're working was kind of problematic right now because they ordered a bunch of ceramic tiles to put on the floor, but part of the ingredients to make that is a sort of clay that comes from the Donbass region. Well, there's a lot of shooting and fighting over there right now, so there's nothing coming in. So, and it's not something you can just switch to something else. You cannot replace what you need from that kind of clay with something else automatically. That's not how it works. And I could go on and on. Look at how many steel manufacturers in Europe are closing down. One of my clients bought an apartment to rent. He wants to put in new energy efficient windows. And the guy he always worked with said, look, okay, I placed your order. I have no idea when I will get it because the factories aren't working all the time. They're working maybe 30, 40%, and everybody wants that glass. There's a lot of demand. There's not a lot of supply. And you can multiply this. I can give you thousands of examples like this. So what for people who are new to this kind of thing, we have an integrated world economy. Everything's connected with everything. You can look at how one company in whatever industrial branch is making certain products. Their waste products will be sold to another company that needs that to make their stuff, and so on. And if one big player says, like, you know what, we have to stop production because it's too expensive because of the energy prices, that whole chain gets affected. And eventually more and more companies, big companies, have to stop working. Like, we can't do this. We don't have what we need. We shut down. The thing you have to understand about that is that shutting down huge industrial plants, it takes sometimes months and months on end just to shut them down without everything, blowing up. And it can take months or even a year to start them back up again. Then look at how many companies and big industrial players in Europe are shutting down or have already shut down. Look down the line. Even if they start up again today, it's going to be maybe months or up to a year until they start up again. And that whole interconnected web of, I use your waste product to make my stuff, and my stuff goes into that product, and so on. Those links, they won't be back online right away again. So we're not going back to the good old days of 2019 before the pandemic. It's just not going to happen.
And I think the good, yeah, let's keep it positive. Good takeaway there. The scope of the problem is part of the solution.
Yeah.
That this kind of globalist, state-led, multinational supply chain collapse, which is what it is, shows that the solutions are going to be local. All right. So as you start to see a reduction in supply, reduction in resource, reduction in everything, what you're going to be doing is sourcing things very much on your own doorstep. And that's that importance of community and your place in it. So for anyone that hasn't already done so, you should be looking very, very immediately around you of, first of all, prioritizing what it is you have for your daily needs individually, family, spouse, extended family, whatever the case may be. And that can be in terms of just, basic diet, energy requirements, but anything specialist like medications and things like that, which we'll come on to in a short while, and look at where's my nearest source for that. So that's a great illustration you made about having the mill nearby. So they've obviously got supplies of wheat. They've got the ability to render it to flour, which is the raw product you need to make your bread maker work, along with a couple of other things, some yeast and water. And so, you're very near that supply chain, and that's much easier to have that with a good working relationship, that honest conversation about where they're at. Because if I'm calling up, energy headquarters, Belgium, and saying, is everything okay? What are they going to tell me? Yes. Well, there's a few problems, but it's fine, sir. Like they're sufficiently far away. They can just give me those, ignorant platitudes and just get the next million callers that are asking the same thing. Whereas your local guy, you should be a bit more like, listen, how much is coming in right now? And in relation to previously, how much is that? You at 80%, you at 20%? Is nothing more coming in? Is the inventory you're holding all you've got? In which case, hey, this might be the day I'm just going to put down a big purchase, because I'm not sure if I come back in a week or two, there's actually going to be any products left on your shelf right now. Yeah. And so isn't this the interesting thing? And I'm not going to be careful how I say this, Wim, although I probably should be. The one thing we've seen for the last 2 years is how people will self-censor or self-silence in order to keep their own job. That's a little bit tied in with wokeism, but it's also just self-preservation. Yeah. So I would say, throughout the medical community, they have known for a long time serious things are up. And they've just not entered in the dialogue on that. They're just not risking coming out and saying anything, knowing they're going to get smashed the minute they do. Yeah. But that conversation you can have with your neighbor that's a nurse, or the local doctor, or the parent in the school that maybe works in that sector, maybe that's where you could squeeze out the beginnings of some indication of the extent of the problem, because they're sort of seen that as a non-conflictory conversation. So what we must be doing right now is maximizing and not leveraging these relationships just now, because you don't want to do it too early that they shut down, they stop talking to you. But you definitely want to be getting very good at conversations with people in your community, and just having that general, like, how's everything going with you? How are you finding things? Listen, in terms of work, is it, I sort of, anonymize it a little bit. I read this article the other day, but I don't know much about the industry, but you work in it, tell me about it. And just listen. Huge power in listening, and don't jump on them like it's their fault. I don't vilify them, because then they're going to show up, but just have that conversation, be grateful and thankful at the end. Okay, I'm much better informed now. Thanks for sharing that with me. And so you just got that much more finely tuned radar of what's going on around you. Because going back to that mob mentality, the mob is eminently predictable in its actions, shall we say. It's predictably unpredictable, unpredictably predictable, shall we say. And so as the riots start and the free-for-all happens, let's throw the question. What's the first thing everybody goes for? It's the high ticket items. They're going to go and get the new sneakers, and they're going to go get the TV and the digital goods and all this, that, and the other. Awesome. And it's at that point you should be thinking, I want to go see the pharmacist and start smashing those supplies down, and buying what I need to, because the mob's not got there yet. They're well on their way, but they're not focused on that just now. It's typically high-end electronics, foods, medicines, and then fuel is in there somewhere, but that normally gets shut down real fast. And then it's the only wrestling against shadow infrastructure, against state infrastructure, as to who prevails. That is the predictable pattern. And we've got a litany of case study on that. So knowing your community, having those conversations, knowing these people is vital, because it tells you where you need to be going to acquiring things as it starts to tighten. And by the way, in case you haven't got the memo so far, 1 hour into this, it's already tightened. This isn't the beginning. We're already well into this, months into these issues. Sounded ranty. Sorry about that.
That's okay. so let's get to practical stuff. So what can people do? I mean, it's
engage with their community. Let's start there. Start talking with people, and start talking with people, not at people, not blaming, not demanding, not asserting special treatment. Be a good citizen, be a good person, and just go out to key parts of the infrastructure to start to find out what's going on nearby. So what are we going to say key parts of the infrastructure are? Your energy suppliers, your food suppliers, your medicine suppliers, and your healthcare suppliers. Right? And I've separated those two things, because I don't know if it's the same now. I think through most of Europe now, there's been a lot of privatization in pharmacies, and that's sort of like a sort of separate industry. So the pharmacy will fulfill the prescriptions from healthcare, but it's also sort of doing its own independent function above and beyond healthcare, and healthcare above and beyond pharmacy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Have you got anything to add to that list? There's 4 things I mentioned there.
It's good.
So it's sort of start there. So just go and build good relationships with as many people in those industries as you can, and look under the loose stones. You're not going to walk into the pharmacy and strike up a conversation necessarily if you're in the middle of a busy city. But have you got kids in school? Is there other parents? Is there a social media board? Is there a volunteer where there's a pharmacological presence that you can kind of align yourself to, things like that? You've got to start being creative in how you start to engender these relationships. Okay.
The one thing I might want to add is, for people who are new to all this, is that the idea of, the lone survivor through cataclysm, through difficult times and so on, does it exist? Sure. It's the exception. Humanity has survived through the millennia by working together, by forming communities, by collaborating. Sometimes against other communities, obviously, but it don't go at it alone. That is choosing the most difficult uphill path possible. Is form a community, and that's you and your partner, your family. Your partner and your kids. Then you've got your extended family, brothers, sisters, and so on, uncles, and expand upon that. Form a community, and if you haven't already, it's a little bit late in the game to start, but the best time was years ago. But if you have to, start now. Reach out to people and start forming a community without, like you said, don't be an annoying brat about it, but sincerely connect with other people. Like understanding, like, we're all in this together. Everybody's going to get the rough end of the stick on this one. So reach out and understand that these connections that you make, these relationships that you build up, it needs to be a two-way street. If it's only about you getting what you want, it's not going to work. You need to understand that community is going to help you through it so much better than just thinking like, I'm going to be on my island, the hypothetical island, and go at it by myself.
Brilliant point. Really well articulated. So that sort of comes into points 2 and 3 I'm going to highlight. So first of all, we're actively engaging with the community in a respectful two-way street as possible. Second, it's to do the same but dissimilar with your immediate circle, with your family. You're going to need them on board. And this is the holy grail of preparedness. And we've been asked this for decades. How do I get my partner on board? And it's a tough one. But what's not going to work is you sticking on a tinfoil hat, frothing at the mouth and raving. No one's going to listen to you. Okay. So you've got to meet them where they're at. Now, the one good thing we've got now, let's keep it positive, is a lot of low hanging fruit to pick from, even pre-pandemic, to sort of be like, do you think there's instability in the world? Do you think this is, everyone's like, what are you on about, Toby? Like, you're just weird, like, shut up. I think now the vast majority of people are sort of understanding that these things can happen here and there's consequences to it. And so all you need is a couple of easy wins, quick wins on informed decision-making that had a clear benefit to your immediate family. And I'm going to use a personal example on this, if that's okay. We use wooden pellets for heating in our house. It's a very common fuel source here. And I typically do 2 orders a year. I do a bulk order, one in the spring to get me through the summer to autumn, and then one in the autumn to get me through the winter. And as I looked at my spring order, that I was really, really disconcerted about the prices. And I'd actually got all the previous invoices, the last 3 years, and I sort of laid them out. And my wife, as much as she can be emotive, she can also be very logical, clinical by the sheer virtue of her work. So data statistics is what she works with. She likes that. I hate crunching numbers, but for this sake, it was like, right, I got all the invoices laid out. I actually calculated the percentage rises myself and saw the spiking trend. It wasn't prices were going like this, prices were doing this. So I sat her down, and she's been married to me for a few years now. So yeah, we've had some weird and wonderful conversations. And a lot of times she's like, just do what you want because you're going to do it anyway. But I really need to start getting her on board now. So I was like, listen, this is what's happening with the prices. And I think that's going to continue. So I want to do like a big order right now, but this is going to be a huge financial investment. So we've both got to agree to it. But even if the trend stays the same, we're saving a lot of money, but I actually think the trend's going to do this, in which case, by this point in the year, we actually won't be able to afford to buy this. We don't have the budget for it. So I want to get ahead of this. Are you kind of cool with that? And she was like, just absolute no-brainer, because I'd done my homework and I presented it in a cool, calm, logical manner, right? And she was like, yeah, okay. We weren't planning on taking a holiday this summer anyway for various reasons. So I was like, we're not going to spend money on a vacation. So I'm kind of going to go all in on this. And I don't think this is going to be a bad decision. 2 weeks ago, we got the latest prices come through from our supplier, along with they're now limiting orders and quadrupling delivery time. Right. Yeah. Now we've gone from that unaffordable to unavailable threshold moment I was talking about. That happened 1 month ago here. She's away right now, and I called her up and I told her, this is just what's happened. This is what it costs now, which is above even my projections. And we're now limited to this amount that's going to get delivered in this time with no guarantees of further supply. And she was like, fair one. You called it. Good effort. Good job. And that's it. I'm not going to get more praise than that, but what a massive win, because now she's starting to trust my judgment. So as I'm getting into other things, and saying, listen, you're away right now, but I want to be buying this. I want this. I want you to buy this. She's sort of not dismissing it or questioning it as much. She's got that trust and confidence in my ability to make the assessment and back it up as I need to. And so we've made a few other decisions as well. This is expensive, but it's a worthwhile investment. This gives us this contingency plan. My daughter's about to turn 18. She's now much more involved in these conversations as well, but not traffic from dad to daughter. It's like asking her opinion. What do you think about this? She splits her time between me and her mom. Her mom lives 2 hours away. That's not that far. In emergency, I could get her, but I also need to know that she's got some contingency at her mom's house. without talking to her mom, unfortunately. Don't go into it, but it's, that dynamics changed, right? When she was little, when she was 12, 13, it'd be more monkey see, monkey do, mentor, mentor. Now it is that you know enough about this. Tell me, what have you got? Is that enough? Do you need any more? And then just dropping gifts in. I saw at the weekend, I had a bag of food and it was like, listen, you're working on your healthy lunches. I know you're struggling to afford that right now. Like, just here's some food for right now. And then here's a few cans and a few supplies, just kind of tuck away in your little stash. Low hanging fruit, easy wins. Open up and lubricate the conversation. So once the difficult conversations start, and they should have already started, and if not, once the difficult conversations start, you can sit around the kitchen table with a coffee in a clear, calm manner and say, family, we now need to be talking about this, and they're going to engage, right? Because that's the critical part. Everybody's age appropriate needs to know what the plan is and how to execute it. It's no use you figuring everything out, and then if something happens to you, no one knows what you've got, where it is, how it works, how to use it. All right. And so for some of you that have been preparing for a while, that maybe done that sort of quite covertly, now you need to start getting the family more involved. What have you got, where, when, how, why? And if you haven't got anything, start to prioritize what is it we need to get, where, when, how, what, why. Right. That's action 2. So extended community, immediate family, and then you're going to look at upskill. We've got access to information and knowledge and instruction right now. No one knows how long that's going to last for. And I'm going to just hit a really clear point right now. I've taught applied wilderness survival for the last 15 years full time. I'm tired. I'm tired of dealing with people now that refuse to listen to me for a decade and now demanding my help. So this winter, I may run, yet to be decided, one public facing course. Everything else is privately booked, long-term students only. No details on websites, no ability to book a course, no ability to access me. That is just rewarding those that have been loyal to me and are now coming saying, Toby, we're really, really worried about this. We want to come and get some additional training. Is that okay? And I'm saying, yeah, of course, because it's you. The difference between unaffordable and unavailable, right? There is now almost no sum of money someone could pay me this winter to run a course for them if I don't know them. All right. Or that threshold is going to be
really high
because it's going to have to be worth my while. And I don't want to deal with idiots anymore because I've done it for decades. Does that make sense?
No, that's a really important point. I think is that if anything, people listening or watching us on YouTube right now, is that the pandemic should have taught you that the first responders, the whole medical infrastructure and healthcare infrastructure and so on is comprised of individuals, of people who have been put through the ringer for 2+ years. A lot of them have left. Like over here, we have a nurse shortage. The nurses have said, like, we're done. It's very difficult, and the same thing applies to a bunch of other things, like all the people who make the electricity work, that you have tap water, that basically modern society can function. All these people have been put through the ringer as well. It's not that much in the news maybe, but whenever somebody got COVID in their industry, well, somebody has to take up the slack. Somebody has to do double shift. Somebody is just not getting a break for weeks on end and so on, multiplied by a few years. So everybody's tired. And then, like you rightfully say, eventually there comes a point where you're like, okay, it's getting to the point, it's getting this bad that I am prioritizing who I will help, what I will invest my time in. Like you said, you've got your own family situation, you've got your wife, and you've got your daughter a little bit down the road. Okay, that becomes a focal point. The worse it gets, the more you focus on that. Expect that from everybody, regardless of what their job is, regardless of how well you know them. Expect that. Expect this. Again, we're talking worst case scenario. Everything's going down the drain. People will narrow their focus to their closest loved ones, and whatever you need at that point is going to be, like you said, unavailable, because they won't be. You won't be there to teach them because you'll be too busy taking care of your own.
Or not. In the emergency services in the military, understand this: we're all getting briefed about mobilization.
Yeah,
that's now a talking point. That I'm getting emails, memos, phone calls week in, week out, as is everybody I know in the emergency services, everybody in healthcare, all military, old friends of mine that I went to basically with 20 years ago. You know, I'm winding them up, messaging them like, "You ready to get back in green?" Like, fuck that, never going back. It's like, guys, you're not going to have a choice. If we get called up, we're going, and you know it. And so imagine that additional, you know, monkey on your back and psychological pressure that I've got to start squaring all that away in my head as well, and having those conversations with my family. Remember going back to that, like, you know, if I've been doing things covertly, then they now need to know, because for a lot of things I'm prepared for that was intrinsically, I'll be taking care of that. There is a very strong possibility I am now just removed from that equation.
Yeah.
And if you mobilize, you're going to war, or you're going to prison, but you're going somewhere. You're not getting to stay at home, you know, roasting marshmallows on the fire because you felt like you didn't want it. Even if you just get mobilized locally within the emergency services, you're going to be on high level call and readiness. And let's face it, the conflict's getting squiffy now. It's not going well. Military targets, you know, civilian targets are now on the table. That was that threshold moment when the pipeline went. That was a game changer, because it's now saying civilian infrastructure is now legit in this conflict, and the borders are starting to get leaky and things are creeping out. And so, yeah, even just as an on-duty firefighter, you're aware you might start getting on some big shout outs soon. If not full on, you know, bombings, just all of the asymmetric warfare and everything that goes in with this, without going into too much detail.
Yeah, we're going to get to the war in the Patreon bonus episode.
All that just layers on. And that's for me. Look at your business owners. Think of the decisions they're having to make, the layoffs, the business costs, like that pressure. It was great what you said there, Wim. It just eats up your cerebral bandwidth. So your focus just narrows down and down and down, and you're starting to prioritize on a much narrower, leaner thing. And so anything outside that just doesn't interest you anymore. So, you know, old Bob that offered you some courses 5 years ago probably ain't going to offer you shit right now, because he's got other things on his mind, right?
Yep. Right, let's get back to the practical stuff. And I'm not having a go at you, Toby. Just it's hard to sometimes talk about these things with people, because there's so much shared knowledge and points of view between us too. It's easy to just automatically assume that everybody gets what we're talking about and why.
Yeah,
it's you coming from a military background, totally different world. I, in my generation, was of the last batch that did their military service. Everybody after me didn't. I'm 50 now, so you've got, you know, a bunch of people, even my age, that didn't do it because they kept studying. Understood. And so on. So it's a different world. Absolutely. And we're trying to explain it to the listener.
And very quick caveat on that, because then I'm going to get to the actual practical actionable points. This last 20, 30 years, history will show is the anomaly. It's the anomalous point. And there's going to be a mix moving forward of old school stuff and technology overlaid with that. I'm 45 this year. I've turned 45 now. The house I was born in had an outside toilet. All right. And it had a coal-fired fireplace. I don't remember it that much, but coal was there for the first 10 years of my upbringing, this, that, and the other. So we're not that far away from that. As you said, we have lived through far worse than what's coming now. Yeah. Except there's 2 generations minimum, if not 3, that are completely unprepared for it, but they're just going to have to learn real fast. And it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. They either won't cope and will choose an exit strategy, and that's on them, or they'll learn to adapt. As brutal as that. Actionable points. You've got to go back to basics and back to the beginning. And what I'm going to give you is my article on the 7 pillars. That's the best written resource to get you started, which we'll put down in the comments, so people can just kind of read and digest that and process it at their leisure, but hopefully with an applied sense of urgency. Quick rounding of the model. The 7 pillars model shows these are the key things you need to be considering in order to build resilience at your individual and household level. But the idea is you build the pillars evenly. So you don't build one pillar up as much as you possibly can to an obsessive amount and ignore the rest. So you build, if you imagine if we had Lego bricks, if I had like 70 Lego bricks, instead of building one tower 70 bricks high, or one tower 65 bricks high and one tower 5 bricks high, I'd want to put 1 brick down on every single pillar and then a second brick down until they were all 10 Lego bricks high. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's about spread bet and getting an even coverage, not only in physical purchases, but in knowledge and skills that you either have internally within your small circle, or you can reliably access, and that's that community part again, that you're not going to in the next 4 months be able to skill up in all of these areas. So you're going to have to pick one or two that are already familiar with you, or you're already passionate about, and upskill on those or focus on those, and then try to tap into a wider community on where those other skills can come from. Okay. That is the ultimate start point, and that's what everybody should be busy with. And even if you're well on your way with that journey, you should be revisiting the 7 pillars and just seeing what parts can you reinforce and what skills can you take into that, again with a sense of urgency.
Okay.
Now, there's a flip side to this. Of course, you're out and about in the community, you're trying to have quality conversations, you're going out and doing bulk purchases, and that has the potential to let people know what you're up to and for them to sort of know that. And so when push comes to shove, we get that classic comment, oh, if it gets really bad, I'm coming to your house. Okay. Yep. And that's the sort of preparedness nightmare, is that, like, you know, you've invested and you've done all this, and everybody thinks they're going to benefit from this. So what we're now in, and we're in a very conducive place for this to happen because the situation is getting so real, is having those low-hanging fruit conversations and encouraging everybody in a calm, measured around us to just take stock of the reality of their situation and see if there's anything they can do to get a little bit ahead of it. Okay, so what we're trying to do is build resilient communities together. And that might be in online forums and discussions and outreach. So it's not about saying what you're doing, because you don't want to give that game away, but you're just encouraging people to say, hey, you know what, as I'm looking around a little bit, feels like this winter might be a little bit difficult, a little bit challenging. I think it's a good idea if everybody thinks about X, Y, Z, and just tries to kind of increase that fortitude and knowledge and resilience in the larger society. And this is something I've been very actively engaged in. Like I say, instead of working on the actual applied in delivery courses, it's very much trying to catalyze some of those conversations in some key forums and some key areas, especially around the first responders, especially with regard to their family, and sort of get that awareness of the issues that are coming down the line. Because like you say, for some people, they're getting blindsided by this, and that's a problem. They're just not acknowledging this issue is actually there. So it's to have that stark realization that these challenging things are coming. And now that is being reported in the mainstream media. That narrative is getting out there now. So it's about taking that narrative seriously and saying, everybody, I think we need to be looking at this a little bit more. I'm going to talk about the younger generation now, because they get wailed on a lot, quite rightly, but they're also smart. They're savvy and they're motivated, and, you know, they just need a bit of guidance. So we don't just want to sort of slap them down and say, it's going to suck for you and you're either going to die or thrive. You know, we can sort of be a little bit supportive in that process and create an environment that they can start to have that conversation, start to have that discussion. And I think what we've got in this generation is a sort of abstract, larger understanding of the world than we had when we were their age. And I look at my daughter in this regard, 17 going on 18. I'm thinking, when I was 17, 18, okay, mobile phones were out, the internet was just starting by dial-up, so it wasn't sort of dominating your day. It was all about hanging out with your friends, going to the pub, going to the club, you know, very much so. It was like in-person experiences. She's telling me, like, oh, did you hear what the British Prime Minister said in a speech yesterday? Because it was on this TikTok channel. Oh, and like there's this, like, that global connectivity is making them understand via their very weird news sources of these bigger pictures, and it's resonating with them, and they're worried about it, and they want to have those conversations. They want to have those conversations with a grown-up in the room that's not going to froth at the mouth and just, you know, scream and howl at the moon, but give them actionable solutions. So whatever your age, if you're young, have those conversations with your friends. If you're slightly older, have those conversations with the youngsters in your life, but let them lead. Ask them what's bothering them, what's on their mind, what is it that they're aware of or they think that they're aware of. And if you ask that and you listen, you'll be amazed at the quality of thought processing going through some of these kids at this time. Some of the conversations my daughters have with their peers and contemporaries is fascinating for me. Yeah. And they understand the problems, but they're not necessarily finding solutions. And that's where having a trusted, I'll say, adult figure or parental figure helps massively, because then they will come and look to you for help and listen to you for guidance. And that's where you get those huge gains and those huge wins and that huge movement of them taking some self-ownership of the issue and starting to be psychologically prepared, because that's the key thing in this, isn't it? We can roll with any punches we want if we see them coming. It's the blind side punch that knocks you out. So what we want them to do is start to sort of see the things that are coming and duck and weave a little bit, to use a sort of, martial analogy. And so this this feels like a lot of talking and no action, but if you haven't actioned all this already, you've got to start with the conversation, quite simply. That's where I'm at.
Before we get back to the 7 pillars, I just want to add one thing, and this is a frame that I like to use. If you're older like us and you're talking to younger people, and like you said, we tend to rag on them a little bit, and sometimes rightfully so, but they don't all deserve it. Okay, you made an excellent point when you said that they have access to so much more information than we had at their age, and that is certainly true. This gives them a lot of the big frame, maybe to view things, the bird's eye view of a lot of things. And the expression that I like to use is their knowledge is a mile wide, but an inch deep. Not always, but for many of them. They see so much more of the world than we did at their age, but they don't have a lot of experience going deep into certain things because they haven't had the time. We've had some of the time. Now, obviously, maybe our knowledge is not that mile wide, but in many aspects of life, it's a lot deeper. You and I have been through more than one financial crisis. It's not our first. This one is looking like it's going to be a really big one, but it's not our first. When I grew up, my parents bought my grandmother's house. That was an old house. It's over a century old. We didn't have central heating. It wasn't isolated. The windows were single layer glass. I remember sleeping as a kid in a frozen bedroom. The whole window was frozen solid. You know what it's like. I could see my breath just going up over the covers, and I would put it all the way up to my head and actually put something on my head as well so that I don't lose too much heat. It wasn't fun, but I survived, and I did it back then, and I'll do it again now. And it sucks having lived through that now. A lot of my kids don't know what that's like, but I told them a sufficient number of times. So just to give them the message, like, even if the coming years are hard, you can survive. It's perfectly possible. So talking at a lot of young people, you will often get a lot of immediate responses like, yeah, but this is why. And then trying to open up the discussion like, well, of course, but there are additional factors that also go into this equation. And that is the voice of experience that we are supposed to have as parental figures and older people, is that you can take it a level deeper. What we talked about before we started recording, thinking beyond first order consequences, second order, third order, and so on, looking beyond the immediate reaction to whatever you propose, but look at both intended and unintended consequences. Anyway, back to the 7 pillars.
Yeah, back to the 7 pillars. So I'm just going to run through them real quick while we're talking. And like I say, we'll then have that article for reference down below. So these are not in priority order, except for the first one is where you should get started. All right. So it is water, shelter, fire, food, signaling and communication, hygiene and medical, and personal safety. Okay. So we want to be having a regard to all of those things. Now, what I'll emphasize on this isn't about strictly disaster preparedness. This is just building more resilience in your life. So if you invest time and effort in this and nothing happens, the politicians swoop in at the 11th hour and save the day, and it's all good. And we have the heating on all winter with the windows open and, waving flags and everything. Don't feel that this was a waste of time. You will be a more resilient individual and household for it. But if we're even a fraction right of what might be coming down the pipeline, this is going to pay huge dividends very, very quickly, that you actually have some structure and a framework around what you're prioritizing and how. Okay. So priorities. In the first instance, think like your initial goal. If I had to stay home for a week, not go out the door for anything at all, but with no running water and no electricity, could I surmount that? All right. Could I fulfill my and my family's needs, daily needs, start to finish for a week? That's the goal. And the 7 pillars gives you the framework of the things you'll need to consider to do that. Okay. And then quite simply, it's adding depth to that. So if I needed to lock the door and not go out for a week and a half, or 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, that's the depth we want to get to. 3 weeks is fairly much a magic number in preparedness terms, because for most incidences, within 3 weeks, they've been sorted out. You know, if you think in terms of natural disaster or riots or civil unrest or whatever the case may be, it won't go beyond that. Or if it does, it's entering an entirely different, new, more dangerous phase. And now we're adapting to that new reality. So quite simply, our preparedness is just a form of insurance against reasonably foreseeable things that can happen at societal level. And it just buys us time to make more informed assessment and decisions. Okay. So by not having to go out into a rioting mob for 2 or 3 days, keeps you home, keeps you safe, and enables you to kind of look at what's going on, look at that bigger picture and think, what's the next thing I need to be considering here? Is it now time to go visit those relatives that live in the countryside outside of the city for a short while? Because this is looking like it's going to, you know, really start to conflagrate and get much, much worse for a foreseeable time. And I don't want to be here myself or with my kids or with my family if mass civil unrest is happening or whatever the case may be. And again, it can be very regional. The south of Sweden is very vulnerable in terms of energy supply because it's all piped down from the north. So it could well be, you know, southern relatives are thinking might be time to go see Toby for Christmas, because you know the lights that are on in my house come from the hydro dam that's in my front garden. Like it's going to take a hell of a lot to turn that thing off, right? And so this isn't about running away. This is about just temporarily relocating depending on what the problem might be. But what you've got to be is calm and collected and gathering information in that moment to make that informed decision, if that makes sense. So that's that big picture goal behind it. But you're going to need a certain amount of resources, supplies, knowledge, and competence to be able to sort of stay home and last through that period. For those of you that are listening and thinking, I got this, I'm already there, brilliant. I'll give you that challenge of this weekend, lunchtime on Friday, turn off the water valve, not the breakers, shut off the electric to the house and go through till Monday just to make sure you're on it and make sure your family's bought into it. And that 48 hours will highlight every single flaw with your current plan, of which there will be many.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Is there anything that you want to add to just this concept of the 7 pillars, or can we go a little bit deeper in one of them? I know this is a difficult question because it's like you said in the beginning, too much detail, and then people are going to get lost in the details. But if we stay too much top level, it stays too abstract. It's finding this balance.
So
is hard.
All I would say in terms of 7 pillars, if you haven't started, start now. Yeah. Don't delay, because from the simple fact, everything's getting more expensive. So if whatever amount of time you wait, you're just spending more money on something you could have already solved. Okay. Yeah. So all I want to imply behind all of this now, whilst we want to be calmed and measured, there is definitely a sense of urgency behind all this. Okay.
Yeah. We have been living an exceptionally awesome summer in Europe. I mean, it's tomorrow is November 1st. And I this morning I was sitting outside in my t-shirt. It's just been incredible warm weather in Europe, which is I mean, it begs the question for all the conspiracy theorists, like, yeah, but secretly the government knows how to control the weather because there's this massive energy crisis. Europe is going to freeze, and now all of a sudden we get this great summer. Or it's aliens. You get all this kind of nonsense going, or is it nonsense? But point is that we don't know how quickly things can turn, but every day I look at the news, the forecast for the weather, and it looks like next week it's going to start getting colder, not freezing just yet, but in a matter of a week or two, we could be in freezing temperatures right now. So time is ticking away if you haven't done anything to even think about preparing. I mean, you don't have to go nuts, but I would suggest, yeah, just get moving. Do it now. Don't wait too long.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's getting more expensive, and that inversion point of unaffordable becoming unavailable
Yeah.
is already there on some things, most definitely, and is coming on others that are a high priority in preparedness terms, shall we say.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to share the PowerPoint thing that you mentioned? So, because I think that's going to be excellent for a lot of viewers. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see it. You mentioned that you have this article somewhere available for people to watch, or what is the best
So
way?
it's a written article. So I did a huge video series on the 7 pillars, and then we distilled that down into a single article that really just like nails the key part of each one. So what I want to do is people to kind of effectively open that document, read it, and sort of action it as they go. So it's just a far more comprehensive, condensed version of everything I want to say. And that's why I'll just gladly share that article with you, because that, you can kind of print out and sort of sit down and go through it in your own time, in a calm manner, and just make your notes as you'll need to do, possibly buy the family in, as we've talked about, and then formulate your action plan and go from there. So let's see that as like a homework assignment.
Yeah, I'll put a link to that in the show notes for the people listening on podcast and not watching us. So I'll put a link in the show notes so you can find an article, and like Toby said, open it up and then you can follow along with us now.
Yeah. Now going back to the PowerPoint, actually no, Wim, I don't want to show it right now. I honestly think this far in, and with everything we've talked about, it's gonna get lost in translation. What I can definitely do is structure a separate presentation going into detail, and we can just do a part 2 of this recording. Super short, 15-20 minutes of just that bit. So we just smash that lesson, and it's there, and it's a standalone so people can access it. Because what I'm worried about, as we normally do, get chatting and go long, is that people sort of won't find this message, or they can't find the timestamp, whatever the case.
No, that's a better idea.
So actually, I want to share that, but I think we could easily, within the next few days, just between you and I, talk about it and just do another quick record, and just get that one down. But let me actually write you a proper presentation for it, instead of just pulling in the one that I've already got and trying to make it work, just to give all of the listeners some justice and reward for their investment of time in listening to us. Let's do that the right way.
I'll put a link to that in the show notes, so we'll get to that as quickly as possible. I'll put that online immediately, and then link to it so that everybody can find. Now, you're right. We've been digressing and going on tangents. And for folks listening, this is how I like to do conversations. I'm not a journalist. I don't do gotcha questions. I do conversations with people that I find interesting, with friends of mine who are specialists in certain things, and so on. So the point is that you get real talk, as opposed to some cookie cutter scripted stuff that somebody's bringing a message, and that's not what I do. So fair point, Toby, that we've been going on in all directions, so it's going to be confusing. We'll get that done after we finish recording. We'll set that up. Yeah. All right, where you want to go now? Which is putting you on the spot, I know. I'm sorry.
So, yeah, no, it's fine. I just want to sort of phrase this well. We started at the very beginning saying people are already tired, so we need to be careful. We need to be mindful of our interactions with people. All right. This is going to require a community effort, a lot of communication, but I just want to sort of round this out by getting a little bit internalized on the individual. And there's a phrase I've been using for some months, if not years now, that is coming home to roost more and more often. That if you don't manage your wellness, you will have to manage your illness. All right. Everybody is now under a lot of pressure, in general, with more pressure coming. It can be you run a company, you've got to make tough decisions to lay people off. You might be getting laid off. Even if you've got a job, your wages are not going as far as they were before, to the point you may already be at the point you cannot afford your monthly expenses on your monthly wage, or you soon hit that point. Like you said, American credit card usage is going sky high, not by choice, because they literally cannot afford to purchase things any other way. All right. So there is a huge amount of stress, pressure, unknowns, worry, concern all around us. And that, sadly, by following some of our advice in this podcast, is going to magnify, because as you have those conversations with your community and find out how bad it is, and you have those conversations with your family and understand how concerned they are, and especially as, you know, as a parent, a lot of that falls on you to come up with the solutions. That's a lot of angst to keep in a body. That's a lot of anxiety. That's a lot of stress. That's a lot of worry. And stress is a killer. We know that categorically. You know, you might die of something, you know, heart attack, whatever the case may be, but very often that is actually a physical representation of stress related symptoms. All right. So in this whole process, what we also have to do is get a little bit internally focused and get some, you know, some mindfulness and some positive coping mechanisms in ourselves, because it's so easy to adapt to the negative coping mechanisms, the drinks, the drugs, the gambling. Jury's out on sex. I don't know, that's got to be negative. Depends how you do it. But it's through the pandemic, we might have fallen into some wormholes already, and that's only going to get worse, and that just compromises our ability to remain calm, rational, and make good decisions. So, as you know, I come from a sort of very background in nature, spending time in the outdoors, and I find myself now really prioritizing at least 1 hour every day taking a walk out in the woods on my own. It used to be a dog walk, and even the dog walk is frustrating me now because these two fucking dum-dums, they just can't just stay still on the lead. So I'll take them for a good walk and give them the walk that they deserve. And then very often early evening, I actually just go out on my own just to process my day, do some breathing, calm myself down, you know, purge through anything I need to purge through. Bearing in mind, I'm doing, you know, a lot of heavy lifting conversations with friends and family right now, not only online, but in person, where I'm becoming the sort of problem solver for them, just to try and get that adequate sleep every night, and then hydrate when I get home and hydrate first thing in the morning. So don't neglect those things. This is now the long game.
Yeah.
None of this is getting solved. So this isn't about managing a short-term crisis where we'd normally rely on intensity and adrenaline. This is about staying in it for the slow burn. We're already 2 years in. Probably everybody's got a bunch of stress-related symptoms already. We need to take those seriously. All right. And you know, from your Tai Chi practices and things like that, you know, you've got the yin and the yang in the physicality. You can do all the hard stuff, but you've got to do all the soft work with it as well. So as you take this on, additionally, or, you know, additionally to what you're already doing, or you start with this new thing, you've got to prioritize some of that time for your own well-being. All right. Because you crashing out the picture early on doesn't do anybody any favors, quite simply. That goes back to what I said at the beginning. Sometimes what I'll say is counterintuitive. This shouldn't be counterintuitive. Sadly, you do need to prioritize your own welfare. And this is in every single protocol, in every emergency services, in every military, in every professional training environment. Your personal safety is the number one priority. It doesn't mean you don't run into a burning building, just means you wear the right clothes when you're doing it. All right. So you've got the best chance of survival. So it's very easy to look at that external gregarious side to this, that big picture. I want to finish with that internalization of you do need to look after you. That doesn't mean you're a selfish prick or anything like that. It just means you balance it out of giving yourself the rest and recovery time and reflective time that you need, ideally on a daily basis. Saving up for the 2 weeks holiday a year, decompression isn't going to cut it anymore. All right. Your body's not going to last that duration of stress at this level. So it's about getting that more, those healthy practices at the very least weekly, ideally daily. Even just 15-20 minutes a day is totally transformative if you do it right. And I'm sure you've got some great examples of that, living in a city and working with some of the things you do. So I'll kick it back to you now on that point.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think the most important part is to, like you said, we're talking now about a marathon, not a sprint. I mean, you're in this for a long run. So what is the safety advice you get when you get on an airplane? If the oxygen goes out, okay, first you put on your mask, then that of your child or whoever is in need of help. Why? Because if you faint, they're not getting anything either. So the whole point is that you have to prioritize. There's no heroic death, you know, sacrificing yourself and then leaving everybody vulnerable behind. That is nonsense. So what you want to do instead is have a systematic approach to. There's a lot of talk nowadays about self-care, and they limit it to a certain way, a certain interpretation. View it as maintenance for the machine that is you. You have to maintain any machine that you have. If it's a car, needs maintenance. If it's electrical equipment, stuff breaks down, replacement parts, and so on. You need to maintain your own body, your own mind, both, not separate, both. Okay, so what are the basics? Like you said, sleep, get enough sleep. This is not optional. you need it. Can you function with 4 or 5 hours of sleep? Yes, but has been study after study that proves that you will be performing suboptimal. Now, there will be periods in which you sleep less, that's fine. And no, you can't just catch up on sleep, doesn't work either. You want to have consistent sleep as well as you can manage. If you're having trouble with that, I would suggest looking into non-sleep deep rest. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Huberman. I'll write that down, that I put a link to that. He has given a lot of advice on all things health related and a lot more, but investigate that. Deep sleep, non-rest, and takes 10-15 minutes depending on how you do it, but that can help you through the day and help you focus, which is the whole point. So you're more focused, more effective. Drink water. Yeah, I'm a coffeeholic, guilty as charged, but drink water. Alcohol, bad. Tasty, yummy, but bad. Understand that. Food, don't eat crap. You know what crap is. It's 2022. You know full well that all the fried stuff, super carbohydrated stuff, all the sugars, all the fats, and so on. You know that's nonsense. Get a truckload of vegetables as much as you can, and protein sources of high quality. Whether it's chicken, whether it's tuna, it doesn't matter. In our Western diets, it is very, very easy to find carbohydrates. Usually the crappy kind, because there's different kinds. I'm not going to get into the details of that. It's much harder nowadays to find high quality protein sources. You need it. It's not optional. You need it, and preferably with each single meal. Not like I'm going to get my protein in the morning and for the rest of the day I'm going to eat chocolate and potato chips. No, it doesn't work. So get that done. And then the next one that I would add is physical activity. If you're already really active because you do manual labor, okay, then it's going to be about recovery more and working out issues and injuries and so on, and overuse. If you're not, if you have a more of a sedentary lifestyle, move. Like you said, go for a walk for an hour each day. Excellent. Do it. You're living in an urban environment, or you can't go out. Okay, there's truckloads of indoor training that you can do. You only need a few square feet to do an excellent full body workout. You don't even need a lot of equipment. I have a video online with elastic bands, resistance bands that I used for a long time to train with. I know I have a better setup because I knew that I needed it. But the idea is that you move. You don't want to do any sort of conditioning, strength training, cardiovascular work. Fine. Stretching. Anybody can do that. Do you have to do splits like our good friend Jean-Claude Van Damme? No. What you want to do is improve range of motion so that your body, as a machine, as a biomechanical machine, has less friction. If you look at your door and it has a hinge and it creaks and it's difficult to open and close, what you lubricate it so it moves more fluidly and easily. So it doesn't take that much effort to move it. Same thing applies to your body. You've got a truckload of joints and hinges, ball and socket joints, and so on throughout your body. If your whole body is stiff, it takes a lot of effort to move, even small movements. You might not feel it because you're accustomed to it, but it takes a lot of effort. On top of that, the muscle tone, the tension in your muscles tends to increase as we get stressed out. The more stress you have, typical, your neck and trapezius muscle, the shoulder muscle, they tend to tense up and people go like that. This wreaks havoc on everything in your body and your mind. It makes you tired, gives you headaches, and so on. Stretching for 5 to 10 minutes a day is very easy to do. It's not that intensive. You're not wiped out, but it tends to help you relax. It lowers the tension. It makes you move better and makes everything else better. It helps you sleep better as well. So there's a lot of stuff you can do on that front. And I would end with something else, and that is that social interaction is good, provided it's not adding to the stress. So you want to also incorporate some sort of social interaction with not just always the same people that is not related to the difficult situation that you're living through right now. Not ignoring it, not pushing it, not sweeping it under the rug, but have something more than just all the problems that you're focusing on. There needs to be more to life as well. I think that is important. And then most of all, like what we've been talking about, even if it's 5 years, even if it's 10 years of this, you go for the long haul. That's your goal. You get one life, in my opinion. If I'm wrong, I'll see it after I'm dead. But so far, it seems to be that you get one life. There's going to be good and bad in it. And it looks like we're in for a crappy period after many, many decades of, pretty much safety and a relatively good life for most people in the West. Well, okay, so the crap is starting. Okay, fine. We'll deal with it best we can. What is your goal? Survive. You want to get to the other end of this. You want to get to the part where you talk to your grandkids and said, look, Grandpa used to live, at that time. And when they asked Grandpa, what was it like to live through the huge pandemic and then afterwards the war in Europe and all that kind of stuff? Well, I'll tell you. And how can you tell your grandkids? Because you're there, because you survived. Is that easy? No. Will you sometimes want to give up? Of course. But having all these different elements in place, like you just said, Toby, like continuously, not once, but continuously working on keeping yourself going. And sometimes that means that you're going to have to pass the torch to somebody else. Like, you have to take over for now because I'm crashing. And sometimes you won't have that luxury. Okay, and you have to keep going anyway until you can do that. But like I said before, the lone hero who survives by himself is nonsense. The unbeatable superhero survivor who never doubts himself, who never has these spells in which he wants to give up, that's nonsense as well. So you're going to have to do a lot of work that normally you don't have to, or you can take for granted. Well, okay, I'm sorry to say, but that's going to have to change. And it's taking, people like to talk about accountability nowadays a lot. Okay, well, take accountability for your own future. It's like, that's it. It's on you. All right, end of rant.
Well, it wasn't even a rant. That was all good advice. And that's exactly on point. It's a phenomenal time to be alive in history. It's going to be challenging, but it is real threshold stuff. But we just need to now gain that mental and physical fortitude to deal with it as best as we can. And I think everything you said there is fantastic. And for the record, in my time down in the Balkans, I've met one or two guys that were the lone wolf that did get through.
They exist.
And physically they survived. And mentally they're wrecked. They're wrecked. And addicted and unable to communicate, all sorts. So when we say survival, it's not taking your physical form through the event. You want to go through it of sound body, sound mind, or be able to recover quickly afterwards, and ideally even enter into that phase of post-traumatic growth. That you are a better person for it, and society is better for what just happened. And that's our only hope, really, because the path that we're on is not a good one. And so going through this tumultuous period, it's on our generation to sort of try to fix some of the mistakes we've made. And that's our challenge right now. So get your head in the game.
Yeah, I was talking to Andy about this, survival in harsh climates and so on. And he said he had a friend who basically went into the jungle to live there for a year in the jungle. And he has the skills to do that. And like you said, it's possible, but then again, you have to be a very specific personality type to be able to live by yourself for a year, because humans are social animals. We need social interaction. Isolation, for instance, when we talk about depression, isolation is the worst thing you can do. One of the worst things you can do, because you will get more depressed if you isolate from everybody else. So try to avoid that at all costs. But if like you said, surviving physically is not enough. If it wrecks you mentally and psychologically and emotionally to the point that your quality of life, the quality of life of these guys must be horrible. Just living through that whole period, and then being isolated, and the damage that does to your psyche is very hard to measure, but it's definitely there. So for the folks listening, this is why we talked about community. It is more than just, well, I know, 50 people and their resources to me. No. It's more than that. It's also staying human, whatever definition of humanity you have right now, but not losing too much sight of that. Years ago, I wrote an article about the Walking Dead TV series. There's a lot we can say about how they get things wrong, but it is a situation in which society breaks down for a silly reason. And I know there's people out there who think zombies are real, but it gives you an example of some of the things that happen when society breaks down. I'm not saying this is where society will go, but if you look at, for instance, what happened in the Balkans, it wasn't that far from it as well either. It was different, but there were some stark similarities there with what you see in that TV show. If you think that's not true, okay, go talk to some people who survived the war there and listen to the horror stories of torture, rape, murder, and the worst possible atrocities that you can imagine. And that is one conflict. There's a bunch more going on around the world right now. So let's end with something optimistic. Toby and I will go to the Patreon bonus episode where we will really share our feelings and answer a bunch of questions that we got. And we will get back to you with a 7 pillars shorter video in which I'm going to let Toby do the talking and just get some really concrete, actionable information. I think we have a bunch of snippets throughout this episode, this interview here. But it's going to be easier, like you said, just to have something concrete and that folks
a standalone, just bang, there it is. So.
All right. Where can people reach you, Toby, if they want to look you up or find some stuff or whatever?
So they can certainly join the Patreon, which is under the Resilience Hub, and you'll put a link to that down below.
I'll link to that, yeah.
And if they want to reach out to me via LinkedIn, just search my name, Toby Cowern, Cowern. I think I'm the only person on LinkedIn with that name right now, so I'm relatively easy to find. And I also, obviously, via that medium, share different articles and additional videos and things like that. And there's a whole archive through the pandemic of stuff, reference material as well. So we're certainly not starting off cold on this one. We're already warmed up. So we put a lot of information out there, plus obviously our previous chats and everything. So that's the way to get me.
And I'll link to the previous episodes in which Toby was on the podcast. I'm a member of Toby's Patreon. It's great. It's great. Just, it's really cheap. so everybody, I mean, the entry level is extremely low. So it doesn't get much better. And like you said, a lot of information is there already. So, and a lot of it is also easy digestible, short videos, but also longer videos. So highly recommended. All right, Toby, this was awesome. Thank you very much. For the listener.
Welcome.
Thank you also for indulging in us going on tangents. We've got you covered. We will get the 7 pillars video done soonest, and I will link to that in the show notes as well as soon as we get it done. Why is this important? Because we want to give you something, not just, we give a lot of context, background, reasons why, but also you need to know specifics, like what to do. Like Toby said multiple times, the trick is if we get too specific, it might not apply to your specific circumstances. If we stay too vague, you don't have enough actionable points. So it's finding that balance. And I think that 7 pillar article is a really, really great way to make sure that everybody's taken care of. All right. Okay. Right. So we are going to continue recording. And if you want to see the fun bonus episode, I'll put a link to the show notes that as well. Toby, once again, thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you so much.